Welcome to Fueling 5G Connectivity and Intelligence Towards Digital Transformation. I'm Marcy Rizzo from MIT Technology Review. We have 45 minutes for the discussion today. I invite you to add your questions in the chat box at any time during the discussion. We plan to reserve 10 minutes at the end of the conversation, and we'll take your submitted questions as time allows. So I now have the pleasure to introduce Carolyn Chan. Carolyn is the Vice President in the Data Platforms Group and the General Manager of the group's Network Business Incubator Division at Intel Corporation. Carolyn plans to set the groundwork for the discussion and will kick us off. Carolyn, over to you.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me. So I am part of the Intel Network Platform Group, and we've been investing and be part of the 5G ecosystem for a while. So it's my pleasure to share some of our learning with you. So let me start by laying the ground of what's 5G going to do, what's a 5G's commercial market snapshot looks like. You probably have heard 5G quite a bit, and especially since Apple just announced the 5G phone. So we have seen so far this year, this is about 100 or so plus commercial 5G networks has been launched in 44 countries. So it's not just a US thing, it's not just a China, Korea, Japan thing. It's actually quite widespread, by the way, including especially in Europe. About 400 or so different devices has been announced by 93 vendors, and about 190 or so already commercially available, including some of the very low cost ones that's coming out. So that's very encouraging. And then one thing I do want to point out is that 5G devices is not just phones. It has CPEs, has modules and laptops and tablets, even drones. And that is a remarkable thing that we will discuss later on in this session, is why 5G is different than all the other generation of wireless have seen. And we have seen so far about 137 million or so subscribers. Out of that, about 100 million is in China, because they start early, but the race is very much on. We do expect that to rise to about 2.8 billion in 2025. And there is actually reports out that by 2025, 30% or so the market share will be on 5G. And that's remarkable. If anyone has been in this market for a long time, this is probably the fastest uptake of generation of wireless than all the other generations before. The other thing why 5G is so important is that there is a significant amount of potential GDP impact. So this is actually from GSMA last year, the mobile economy. You could just see the investment that goes in the CapEx investment that goes in by markets like US and South Korea tend to be on the leading edge of the investment. But you see a lot of the markets are really catching up very fast, especially around the new rollouts, network optimization. And then I wanted to look at the pie chart on the right. So if you look at the 5G, it's way more than just a consumer aspect. Look at pointing some of the agriculture and mining and ICT and trade and public services. Later on, we have three distinguished panelists with us. They're all CEOs of companies that will be focusing on these vertical markets. I think those are the reason why 5G is becoming a significant impact to the overall economy and not just the AT&T and Verizon, right? So the operators obviously will be the first one to invest. So about 80% of their CapEx will be on 5G in the next 5 years. So I want to just stress that, how critical it is for the ecosystem to really gear up to participate in the next 5 years. It's almost like a little bit of gold rush. And the timing is very much compressed. Almost 80% of the CapEx will be on 5G. But that's not the part that makes everybody excited. The one that's even more exciting is about enterprise verticals. These are the real opportunity. Starting with China, they're already seeing this we actually already seeing that in China. Investment goes in the factory, the V2X market. In fact, there are highway, that's the spec of highways coming out, actually dictates that there will be a lot of fibers, regional data centers, and mini edge data centers we serve to enable this kind of verticals for, especially around V2X. So if you think that the traditional wireless market is really for the uptakes of Ericsson, Nokia, AT&T, Verizon, that's no longer always the truth. The truth is 5G will plow this field that says enterprise verticals. And that invites a lot of innovations that come in. It's not just the traditional telco players, but also the IT players, the OT players. That's why you see a lot of the cloud investment, like Microsoft acquisition of 2 companies, Metaswitch affirmed, is one very clear indication that they are in coming into this market, because the fact that 5G allows that, enables that to happen. So what's a 5G is both evolutionary and revolutionary. Traditionally in the wireless network tend to be very evolutionary. You add on more bandwidth, you add on more spectrum, you faster and bigger. But in this case, it's beyond that. So what we have today is release 15. So that is the one that's targeting consumers. So that's an announcement for AT&T and Verizon, T-Mobile, and the Apple iPhone and Samsung phones and so on. But going forward, release 16 is out. It introduces something called ultra reliable and low latency URLLC, introduces the time-sensitive network domain. These are the traditional network that runs in the industrial side. It's now part of the 5G spec. And when I say spec, that means that when the standards develop, is developed with this kind of unique characteristics in mind in how they design the entire protocol stack. And that's very much a difference than what was before. Before, all of the other generation is design for consumer and try to retrofit it for enterprise. And this is done very differently. And you have release 17 coming out. It's a release 18 and so on. It really becomes very much a race to enable all the different verticals to be leveraging this market. So the bigger picture is that 5G is a catalyst for new kind of paradigm of computing. It's a much more than a telco connectivity. It's way more than a connectivity play. It really connects the edge to the cloud in between 5G networks. Just think, if you think through that, it's a much bigger game changer. So what's the foundation of 5G? So Intel, I mentioned Intel's been in this now for the last 10 years. We're building something called network transformation. What we're doing is taking what we have, our portfolio that serves the IT world, serves the cloud world, and bring that together and run this whole cloud native, open standard, open interface, transparent white box principle into the network. So it's a mixed network, very open. So we call it cloud native network. If you think about a network, it's really extension of the cloud to the edge. You want to run your AI network workload, analytics workload, in addition to the networking workload. This is all made possible by that. So in order to do this, one of the things that we have to have is developers. Developers are very vital to the IT ecosystem, to the cloud ecosystem. We have to have that in telco. Telco traditionally is not that much. It's very close. It's a small ecosystem. To that end, Intel is one of the founding partners of something called 5G Open Innovation Lab. We co-founded it with T-Mobile, with NASA. We've been recently joined by Microsoft, Dell, VMware, and MDOS. Our mission is to build a developer ecosystem, really creating the value and pull through all of that 5G goodness, all that capabilities to enrich that to all of the enterprises out there. So we provide ecosystem support, we develop use cases, and Intel, for example, provide engineering support and platforms. And what we want to do is to create a new, vibrant developer ecosystem that we can scale and make that 5G dream come true. So I'm very lucky today. We have our CEOs of our 5G Open Innovation Lab with me. So I'll be having some conversation with them. And if you have questions along the way, please don't forget to put in the chat. So first with me is I would like to introduce Andrew Scott. He is the CEO of Keychain. Andrew?
Hi, Caroline.
Hi. So thank you for joining me. So I would like you maybe introduce a little bit what your company does and why 5G is important to your company business.
Thanks, Caroline. So as Keychain, we're looking to solve issues that exist in the supply chain. And we're looking to do that through the implementation of private LTE of 5G and AI to solve some of the black holes that exist in really large outdoor areas such as ports or rail yards or warehouses. The issues that exist traditionally in the supply chain is those large outdoor areas haven't been well served by traditional network providers in the past, which means that the implementation of new technologies like AI or automation are really limited. And so as a company, we see connectivity and 5G as the core to that solution. The AI solutions, the computer vision solutions that we implement wouldn't have been possible without 5G or without private LTE, because we're able to control the network access. We're able to deploy devices wirelessly that in the past would not have been physically possible or cost effective. So for us, we're able to deploy a lot of devices, and we use Intel technology and Intel platforms to help with that. And then we have a model where we democratize that data across the variety of people within the supply chain. So when we think about 5G, we think about it, as Caroline has said, differently than maybe a network operator has. We don't do voice. We're not interested in handsets. We work to create our own devices. We work with partners on how we can deploy those devices across the networks. I think the other thing that we look at with 5G is a lot of people concentrate on the bandwidth and the throughput, but we're interested in security. We work in sensitive areas like ports and airports where homeland security and border protection for every user is important. So we're able to control the devices and the information using 5G and the encryption that it offers and the control that it offers. And we're able to build the networks that suit our customer base and suit the users of the supply chain. So we're not having to make decisions that a network operator would have that are around, large video users who want to stream Netflix. We're able to protect the networks from those, which is really appealing to our enterprise clients. So that's a little bit about Keychain. We've been super lucky to be part of the 5G Open Innovation Lab and work so closely with Intel because it is a very new environment. The business models are different, the deployments are different, and there's a lot of education that needs to occur with customers, investors, hardware partners, so we appreciate being here and appreciate being part of the lab. And the two of the other companies that are here are potential partners for us and our customers and what we do, which makes it even more exciting.
Yeah, it's really about creating ecosystem, right? One person, one Intel, one Keychain doesn't do it all. We need the whole village to do that. Yeah. Well, thank you. Please stand by because we're gonna do a little panel after that. Next, I would like to introduce you to Eric. And Eric is CEO of another company, Transparent Path. And Eric, maybe you could also share with us why 5G is important. How is this Open Innovation Lab been helping a Transparent Path to go in your business?
Sure. Hi, Caroline. And so happy to be with you all today. My company, Transparent Path, has been connected to the Open Innovation Lab since its beginning. The founders of the lab have brought together just a crazy collection of amazing companies, academics, investors, subject matter experts, and our friends like Caroline at Intel, along with NASA, T-Mobile, and Dell. They've all been contributing to helping startups like ours become more successful through technology partnerships, mentoring, tech support, and probably most importantly, moral support. So it's really humbling to be a part of the lab, but even more so for us because we're not a typical 5G use case that you would think of. We're focused on food producers and agriculture, and that's not something that people associate typically with either 5G or edge computing. Both of these technologies are essential to our business because our platform uses continuously connected sensors and artificial intelligence to monitor food shipments throughout the supply chain, from the grower all the way to the retailer. We serve small to mid-size folks, and for a lot of them, their supply chain is usually a black hole of data. They barely have, they're still using fax machines and Windows 98. In fact, if you look at a lot of the systems that are in use at our customer sites that we've walked into, a lot of them look like they haven't been updated since Windows 98. And they're mostly disconnected. They're point solutions. They don't encourage data sharing. They don't encourage collaboration. And so customers tell us they have to juggle all these dashboards along with their paper files and their phone calls. And that's the other truth about the food business, is that a lot of supply chain transactions are still conducted with paper. For example, when a trucker drops off a load of frozen seafood at Costco, they want a paper receipt they can hold on to and wave around and prove that they did their thing. And we're still, I didn't even know you could buy a fax machine still, but evidently you can, and they're in widespread use in the food business. So the solution to all of that, to that black hole, is to automate the collection of data. We do that through these sensors. A lot of things can go wrong with a load of food in a very short time, half an hour. So we need sensors to constantly monitor the location and the conditions of food throughout its journey, and that's where 5G comes in. As these sensors become more widespread, we will need wider data bandwidth that the 5G networks bring. Imagine millions of these sensors operating in rural areas, collecting soil data or water information, automating sprinklers, shipment sensors, and they're all transmitting data every 10 minutes or maybe every 1 minute. We like the data speeds, but we're more interested in the volume that 5G provides. And the other technology I want to quickly mention that has so much promise is edge computing. To your point, Caroline. Moving all this data back and forth will create huge bottlenecks and expensive loads on cloud servers. So if we move some of the data and some of the processing, including AI, for example, to like alert people that their $400,000 load of crab meat is about to go bad, then we can reduce our costs and we can still provide a lot of value. So just a quick example, what if we could predict when weather might impact production in certain regions, like flooding in Kansas or something? Where do I source my product from now? Or when I can't find talent due to COVID, how am I going to rethink my routes? How am I going to rethink my scheduling? What if we could predict when equipment is going to break down, refrigerators, or when a partner might break down and make a really expensive mistake? So these intelligent alerts and prescriptive actions could actually save some of these smaller food companies who are really right at the edge of solvency due to COVID.
This is actually, you point out something that I hope that people will take away from, is the future of the technology was really enable data. Data consumption, data collection, and data analytics, and that's really what 5G brings. If you think of it as a highway, it connects data everywhere, from the edge to the cloud. Before, from edge to the cloud is a very expensive proposition, and the more and more we found is that data has to be consumed locally, and that's where the edge, the compute really comes in. And you actually highlight that really well. Thank you, and please stand by. We'll have a little a conversation after that. Last but not least is Dirck, and Dirck is CEO of Taqtile. And so the same question to you, Dirck. What does your company do, and how does 5G play into your company strategy?
Great, thanks, Caroline. Nice to see you again, and thank you everyone for joining our session today. It's an honor to be here. So Taqtile is a company that focuses on delivering digital transformation for frontline workers. That's really, it sounds like a marketing slogan, but it's actually true. So if you imagine a knowledge worker we've had access to all the tools that we've needed for the last 20, 25 years. It's in the form of an office suite of one form of or another, Google Docs or Microsoft Office or whatever. Our jobs as knowledge workers have been 100% digitally transformed. Our problem sort of pain is right here in front of us. Most of us actually had no problem, at least from getting our work done as COVID sort of shut down. We have all the tools that we need. We have all the compute platforms that we can possibly need. Frontline workers, people that are out in the field, that are that use their hands for the jobs. These tend to be people in the manufacturing space, medical workers, oil and gas workers, people that work in ports, people that work in the agricultural business. These people have not had the same benefit of digital transformation because of all of the form factor issues around how do you deliver a powerful and connected compute experience for these people when they are out there in the field doing their job, right? And if you look at that market, there's roughly 500 million knowledge workers in the world. There's 2.5 billion frontline workers in the world. So what we're seeing, and I hear Andrew and Eric talk about, ports and and agriculture. These are not, traditionally thought of as technology markets, but I think that sort of the previous inability to sort of get data, Caroline, as you sort of pointed out, it's a data problem. Get data to and from those locations and the workers in those locations has been the fundamental problem. So if you look at 5G as a solution, we all represent problems that 5G can help solve, right? And so for our product specifically, we have our platform is called Manifest. It enables frontline workers to very easily capture step-by-step processes over industrial equipment or industrial facilities or any sort of a step-by-step process that you want. It's actually fairly generic from that regard. And then codify that in such a way that someone can very easily come along and follow those step-by-step processes as if they were an expert, right? And so this has implications to how we think about the labor force going forward, thinks about how enterprises who previously were not sort of data first enterprises can become those. And the underpinning of it all is a solid and secure network connection, as opposed to Andrew, who mentioned, hey, we don't need video, we don't need all this stuff. We do, right? So when our workers are out there and they're working on a job, sometimes they don't know where to go or what to do. They can call an expert and actually show them their problem canvas, which, by the way, is a three-dimensional world. It's not a two-dimensional world, and get guidance from that person remotely, or they can access a set of step-by-step processes that's been stored either on the edge, Caroline, or in the cloud, right? And so through that, like instant availability to expertise, our goal is to make everyone an expert. Now, as it relates specifically to the 5G lab, as Eric, we were lucky enough to be one of the founding members in the inaugural class of the 5G Open Innovation Lab. And this was a very weird time when the lab kicked off. I mean, like, we all knew it was coming. We didn't know how COVID was going to affect it, but Jim and Intel and everyone behind the lab just like pushed through. And we were supposed to have an in-person kickoff, and we were supposed to, there was all this stuff that we were going to be doing in the lab. Well, it all came to Zoom, and you know what? This is something that I started looking forward to for our 2 to 3 calls a week, whatever we had. Eric and the other CEOs sort of became like my grounding to the real world. So Eric made the point of like it's a great it's a great amalgamation of leaders and support networks from both the participants as well as the sponsors, and specifically to what the lab enabled from a technology perspective. We had access to things that we wouldn't normally have had access to. We have access to, and that's from the infrastructure, but also the new technology that that our other member partners were delivering. And I know Eric has had direct conversations with other people in the lab. I've had direct conversations with Eric. I've had direct conversations with Andrew, who is in the current class, and the level of collaboration and the community of thought leadership that's being developed through the lab, it's extremely unique, it's extremely focused, and it is extremely productive.
I think, Dirk, you just highlight why our intention of being part of this lab, because if you look at what telco has been, I've been all my working life's been telco, and it is such a small ecosystem. It's almost like everybody knows everybody. You got to have an engineering degree, understand RF to work in here. But 5G presents a whole new opportunity. And look at the three of you. Your background, your companies is so different. And it really takes a wide variety of ecosystem to do this. And you gave a really, really good example of why. Before we get to, there's some questions coming in, but before we get to that, I do want to ask, you mentioned COVID is on everybody's mind. And we've been driving this 5G longer before this whole thing hits. We've been looking at this as being digital transformation. From all three of you in your respective business, do you see digital transformation slow down, speed up? How's that impacted by the fact that we're in this very strange environment?
Well, since I'm unmuted, I will take the
You go first.
So, I mean, our customers tend to be on the industrial side. Not all. We work with manufacturers. We work with defense companies, pharmaceuticals, et cetera. But all of our customers rely on people being at facilities or in front of equipment to do their jobs. Well, in March, the flare gun was shot off, and it was like, shut the machines off, turn the lights off, shut the door, lock it. And
very sudden, right? Everything just gone.
So again, knowledge worker versus frontline worker. Knowledge workers sort of like all of a sudden started to do conference calls in their pajamas, and they were able to sort of keep up with things, right? But frontline workers, not so much. So without question, there was a discrete stoppage of things for at least a month and a half or so. And then people started to sort of, like utilities needed to keep working, oil needed to keep pumping, grain silos needed to be emptied, like all this stuff, like, shipping containers needed to move. So we did start to open up, and once things sort of started to open, we actually sort of saw the engine start to move slowly, but it's starting to move much faster by now. And at this point, the tools like what we offer enable workers to access knowledge without calling someone directly over. You can show someone what you're doing, whether or not they're in the next room or on the other side of the world. So when an expert cannot travel, overseas to work on a plant or something like that, we can enable a very high level of fidelity in a collaborative experience in that regard. And so we are seeing this adoption of our technology rapidly accelerating as we're going into the second half.
It's actually faster. It's actually accelerating. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So COVID will eventually, as we look back and assess the disaster that was 2020, COVID will be seen as a catalyst for our area. I think it also will be seen as a catalyst for 5G adoption, by the way.
Yeah. I tend to agree with you. Maybe, I don't know, Andrew, you want to say, and then we ask Eric to comment?
Yeah, I think what's been interesting for us is certainly companies are now being forced towards digital transformation. And for us, you know, we, as you know, one of our use cases is the replacement of clipboards. So the idea of contactless transactions in an industrial environment has become a lot more appealing. As how do industrial companies keep their workers working, but how do they keep them safe? And that's often keeping them away from others. And so, you know, using that connectivity, using, you know, AI and IoT devices is how can you better protect your essential frontline workers? How can you land transactions that have maybe been based on paper and pen? How can you digitize those? And people are looking at a broader level than they maybe did before the pandemic.
Eric?
Yeah, I mean, you think about transformation and disruption. COVID has disrupted everything, right? Especially the food business. You've all seen the stories of farmers dumping their crops in the fields and food banks screaming for more at the same time, just a mismatch of supply and demand. Dirk mentioned frontline workers. A good example are truck drivers who don't want to go to infectious states. They don't want to risk dropping a load off and coming back with a virus. And it was especially difficult in the beginning when truck stop showers were closed. Many of them still are. Restaurants were closed. They couldn't just go in for a bite to eat. You know, and even receiving docks where they drop the load and they turn in their paperwork and get paperwork back and put up barriers so that drivers can't infect the people that are working there. So, you know, transformation is difficult for everyone when things get scary. Especially for mid-sized, smaller food producers and frontline workers like drivers. Here's an example of an Intel-powered sensor. Truckers, for example, are often worried that we're using these to track them, you know, and so they'll throw them out the window on the freeway. It's like, we just want to track the food. That's all that matters. And if we can help these sort of non-tech savvy folks understand the benefits and make that leap of trust that this is ultimately a net positive, then we can transform this industry and get it out of the 1980s technologically.
Actually, Eric, while I have you, there is a question from the audience asking, with your customer in the agriculture space, what's the realistic connectivity expectation between edge and the cloud?
Yeah, we're looking at a multi-year roadmap. Hopefully not too many multis. You know, right now the networks are all working really hard to expand. T-Mobile, who's also a partner, has lit up a lot of 5G capability on the lower bands out in rural areas like Yakima, Washington, here, one of the big apple growing areas of the world. So things are coming online right now as we speak, and that's going to solve, from a connectivity perspective, some of these issues. We also see edge servers being deployed perhaps regionally, and doing a lot of the AI processing out in the field on these devices. Now, this will all be dependent upon this backbone. So this is not something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to happen over the next year to 2 years.
Yeah, and well, you know, we actually been actively working on the agriculture space as a rural 5G initiative. So Intel is actually part of something called Rural Cloud Initiative, and there's some federal money coming in, but more importantly, because just like you said, there's a lot of interest in enabling rural 5G. Not just, you know, it started with agriculture, but now with situations happening, hospitals, rural hospitals, education. You read every once in a while that the reservations in Arizona just have no connectivity. The kids need to be schooling at home and so on. So we do see some active investment really started coming in as well. So let me go to another question, and I'll take a question from the audience. Do you see that 5G changing the best practice in your industry? I think we touched upon that a little bit before, but maybe each one of you can jump in with a little bit more. The best practice going forward, do you think 5G as a technology would change that?
Well, I might as well start because I'm unmuted. So just getting supply chains connected is changing best practices. And you know, getting back to Hema Bindu's question, there's most folks in agriculture don't even have the most basic data analysis tools. A lot of stuff is done still in Excel. A lot of stuff is still in filing cabinets. So we have to transform that. We have to change that as a best practice. Most of the devices, the sensors that are being used today are standalone devices that have to be plugged into USB when the driver gets there. So everything happens after the fact. So very few are currently connected continuously. And the ones that are typically 3G, 4G at best right now. But as the industry transforms, as more sensors come online, modem costs come down, then I think it'll just be obvious that 5G's bandwidth will be a minimum table stakes for a device.
Yeah. Anyone else want to take a shot at that?
Yeah, look, I think that, and we've just signed, as you know, Caroline, a pilot deal to build out a network in Utah with the state of Utah, specifically around transport and logistics. And some of the challenges that Eric has, you know, that network will help solve. And it's not just a 5G network, it's a 5G and edge network. So a lot of the challenges that exist in industry are not going to happen until it's the chicken and the egg that these networks are deployed. And I don't think that we can all, in industrial verticals, rely on the network operators to deploy capital in that space. So I think there's some interesting models that are going to change things, public-private partnerships that will drive this, because the waiting for these solutions, they're going to be deployed in the places that maybe already have connectivity and not the ones that need connectivity.
I think that just to follow on to that, I think that that's really from our perspective, you know, our customers want to be able to move seamlessly from the home office and the factory out into the field, and that's one thing that 5G, you know, really you know, really promises or really enables us to do. The 5G lab, you know, Caroline, as you know, was designed more around enterprise, you know, the enterprise applications of 5G. So 5G, people think about the wars that are going on between T-Mobile and Verizon, AT&T, and everyone else, and you know, that is a part of the comprehensive network. But when you don't have to worry about moving from the public network to the private network, and you can do that seamlessly, and you know that you have quality of service, and you know that you have security and low latency, like for us, again, for people that are high bandwidth, you know, low latency required applications, like that's key for us. And it does involve edge, it involves 5G, it involves public networks, but also private deployment of 5G.
Yeah. And you know, Deborah Stokes just mentioned that, like, before everybody think, oh, telemedicine, oh, that's going to take 10 years, 5 years. Telemedicine is here. Telemedicine happened last 2 months ago. You know, it's really interesting. Actually, there was another question that is asking. You know, we talked about edge connectivity and agriculture and so on. We're now seeing a lot of the Starlinks, the low LEOs that's being launched, right? Elon is in it, Jeff Bezos in it, everybody with a few $1 billion to spend is in there. How do you think that that changed the edge story now that you have all these hundreds of thousands of little satellites running around coverage? Like, maybe, I don't know, Eric, being in the agriculture side, does that change your company strategy?
It provides another channel for the data to get to our platform. I think that it all depends on the modem price, to be completely honest, because devices are expensive. You know, the modems are, they're probably the most expensive part of the device. So I mean, it would be great to remove the limitation of the 5G network reach, but it ultimately comes down to cost. And for a lot of agriculture folks, they just don't make that much money. You know, they're not, especially the mid-sized players. The big companies, different story.
Cost efficient, right? Cost is
exactly.
the ROIs. the most important thing. Yeah.
It's
So
cool.
yeah. I was in a satellite users group meeting yesterday. Definitely came up quite a bit. Is how do they bring that to different verticals that previously isolated oil and gas, for example. I think Andrew, maybe even in your business, that could be a play too. The having access to all the satellite technology out there.
Yeah, I mean, satellite's interesting, and I totally agree with Eric. It's ultimately going to do with cost of the CPE and the modem, and then what they're looking to get for it, and it will fill gaps. You know, it's like the building out these networks. They're not going to be everywhere, so can you have this consistency of service? And to Dirk's point, it's like from an enterprise client, they just want a seamless network, whether it's on their own or roaming onto to other networks, whether it's satellite or traditional. So, but cost is key.
Yeah. After we talk about all these 5G and edge and so on, I do want to ask you, you guys are, to me, you are doing the most challenging part, being in the early adopter business. I work for Intel. There's a big Intel. So I always think that my admiration, my hats off to all three of you. Any advice you give to people in the technology sector with all this chaos going around? And not when I say chaos, it's not just chaos in terms of COVID, but there is a lot of intersection of technology, right? For the first time, you have AI. You have this cloud computing being totally democratized through edge. You have this reach of 5G everywhere. We just talk about satellite. How do you chart your path forward, giving all these different elements that can potentially influence your destiny of your company? As a leader of that company, any advice you give someone who wants to get into this startup business, get into the developer world for leveraging 5G? Any advice you can give them?
Well, I think that I think that we could probably all talk for a couple hours on this topic, right?
You're better with a glass of wine, right, Dirk?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, like my takeaway, I'm a business guy. I'm a CEO. Some CEOs are technology CEOs. I'm a business CEO. Like, what the thing that I am loving about the 5G environment is this sort of the ecosystem of players and the sort of let's all do this together approach. Like, there's a lot of people that want to help. There's actually a lot of areas where startups can go to get, little bits of money that help them sort of just like do little proof points as they go forward. And if they can't get money, they can get really good advice or enablement or anything like that. I mean, just the fact that we're all talking with you, Caroline, is proof of that. And the community is really what I would encourage people to investigate and jump into.
Yeah. So we got about 2 minutes left. Anybody else want to jump in before we wrap?
Andrew, you want to go?
I was going to reiterate, I think it is about community, and I think 5G is multi-layered. In the world that I live in, I've had enterprise clients who want to use what Eric does because they're in Quaychain and he provides a level of service. We've got clients who are super interested in what Dirck does. We need network partners. We need edge partners like Intel. It is a different ecosystem, and it is much more collaborative and partnership driven. So yeah, we see it's working together. Startups and the industry leaders like Intel and T-Mobile and others to as startups we can do things that they can't do and see opportunities they can't. But we need their help to get there. We can't deploy capital to do all these things ourselves.
I know. That's why we're having the 5G Innovation Lab. That's why we have all three of you here, because it takes way more than just a few of us to make this happen. In my mind, this is probably the best time to be in a startup business to take advantage of this. And thank you so much, Dirk, Eric, and Andrew, to be with us. And And thanks everyone who's on the audience, and thanks EmTech for hosting us. And it's been a really enjoyable time. Stay safe out there. Bye-bye.